do you find wearing, the habits and being in religious life, is there an expectation that the more religious someone is, the more God will show up in their life? Is that something you deal with?
I think that miracles often bring about a kind of revolution of grace in a person's life, but they also draw our attention to the quiet, the unseen, the hidden movements of grace that are often afoot in the human heart in ways that are largely undetectable, but still awesome. So I came up over the saddle probably at about 1:30, and I spent what was in effect the next 2+ hours trying to find the trail. I was just going up and down that trail, trying to see if I could identify things from new vantages, trying to take turns, which my map indicated ought to be available, but always doing so at the wrong point and basically coming up against a sheer drop, a type of thing that I could not navigate on 2 feet. And then it was at that point, maybe an hour and a half into the adventure, where I started hearing in the valleys, in that region, I started hearing what sounded to me like avalanches. But I just started kind of praying continuously, just asking the Lord for help, for guidance, for indications, praying through the intercession of the Blessed Virgin. I'd been praying to the Lord, I'd been praying to Our Lady, and I just said like a little prayer to my mom, basically if you can, help me in this situation. And in that moment, within 5 seconds, I saw a marker that I hadn't seen to that point. You appeal to saints because God, in His loving kindness, has seen fit to draw you to Him in the setting of the Christian community. That God loves you so much that He will give you access to all manner of good things. Death is bad, and we do fear it on some level, but we can experience a joy and anticipation of heaven which keeps that fear in check and even overwhelms that fear by a yet more potent affection.
Welcome back to Heaven Meets Earth. I'm your co-host you love second most, Ryan Bethea. You'll notice that my illustrious co-host, Abby Robertson, could not be with us today, but don't turn off the podcast right now. I assure you, we still have a great interview, and I'm going to place those expectations upon my very good friend and our guest, Father Gregory Pine. If you were curious as to his outfit, for those watching and not listening, we are going to have him explain what these wizard robes are that he is adorning for us, but so much more about what he's wearing and why he has these cool beads he prays with, and all the mysteries of the Catholic Church will be unveiled to us today with Father Pine. So Father Pine, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
It's my joy. Thanks for having me.
It is. Okay, I want to double click on that. So my joy. And when I first met you, so
way
obviously
back
on this show, we love having ecumenical dialogues and just because we know that, correct me if I'm wrong, Catholic position is that God works anywhere. He's not beholden to any one particular tradition. He can work anywhere, anytime, any place, and you don't have to be Catholic to see amazing miracles.
That is true.
Okay.
CF, Lumen Gentium, paragraph 16, for those of you who are nerds and want to follow links in the show notes.
We will put that in the show notes there. So would you just explain what that is for us?
There's a document that was produced by the Second Vatican Council, which is the last time that Catholics had a huge family team meeting to try to clarify what we think and do. And in that document, they kind of drilled down on kind of what's going on, especially with non-Christian religions, but then also with various Christian ecclesial communions or churches. And the basic statement is the Catholic belief is that the Church of Christ subsists in the Catholic Church, so you have access to the whole of it in the Catholic faith, but that elements of grace and salvation exist outside of the Catholic bounds, as it were, so that God's gift is so potent that it spills over and it's present. Obviously, Orthodoxy, Protestantism, those are clear things like baptism, obviously, and Christian marriage, and other things besides. But then it goes
Chick-fil-A.
on. The Lord's chicken, amen.
Okay.
Then it goes on to describe, how the Lord is at work and present in Judaism, in Islam, in those who seek Him with an upright heart and beyond. So that is to say, sometimes people have the impression that Catholics are a rather exclusive club, in that Catholicism exists so as to afford the Catholics themselves the opportunity for self-congratulations. It's look at us being Catholics.
You are the one wearing the cool outfit between the two of us. So, although I should say there are plenty of Protestant churches where the pastor is wearing some very significant apparel.
Yeah. I don't know actually how many people would consider my outfit cool. You know how sometimes when you hang out with people and you acclimate yourself to their sense of style, you start thinking yeah, it is cool to do that or to dress that way. So I think it's cool to a very limited subset of humanity, but I think basically everyone else is what's wrong with you? So yeah, So thank you for thinking it's cool. I've duped you.
I do think it's cool. So actually, perhaps you could because I think I didn't know, and it's taken me so much time to learn all the proper terminology and just the history of that. But give the folks at home a little background on why you're wearing what you're wearing, your order, and you could also, if you so choose, you could parallel it with Harry Potter houses if you want to give us some context of what the Dominicans are.
Sure, yeah, gladly. So I'm a Dominican friar, and we're called Dominicans because the order was founded by Saint Dominic in 1216. And the emphasis with the Dominican friars is on preaching and teaching. So for folks who are familiar with Catholic religious orders like the Dominicans or the Franciscans or the Benedictines or the Cistercians or the Jesuits or the Redemptorists, all Catholic but kind of with different emphases. The word that we use in Catholic conversations is charism. So like a kind of particular stamp or a particular mission from the Most High God to carry out within the setting of the church and for the world beyond. And what else is interesting? Oh yeah, so I'm wearing a white habit.
So it's called a habit.
We call it a habit, yeah.
So when they say the 7 habits of highly successful people, this would be one of them.
Yeah. So if I were to possess 7 habits, I could, you get it.
Yeah.
So it's referred to as a habit, and that connection is not insignificant. So we refer to a habit as something that you develop which perfects your activity. I mean, it might be a bad habit, but a good habit is a type of pattern of behavior that you develop which perfects your activity. So rather than being like, am I going to do this right thing? You get in the habit of doing this right thing. You form a virtue. So it's a way of kind of shaping who you are, shaping your personality and your approach to life. And the idea is that a habit, the one that I'm wearing, so the second sense of the term, would shape who I am and shape my approach to life. Not just in that I would be embarrassed to be seen in a black window, tinted window black. I don't know the arrangement of those words. But that I wouldn't take a Cadillac Escalade to the recording of the show. But in the sense that it should communicate to me and to those with whom I live something of the sobriety of the call to live a gospel life. Because it's basically a garment of penance.
And so as a friar, when you join an order, is this, what's the idea here is that since priests have to be single and celibate, right? So but the idea is that you live amongst others, and that's part of spiritual formation. And I guess maybe walk us through, like when you join an order, is this something you have to, if you're going to be a priest, you either have to be part of a church or an order, right?
Yeah. So two main ways to be a priest. The one is to be a priest in a place. The other is to be like a priest with a particular charism. So we call the former ones diocesan priests. So it's like you've got the Diocese of Brooklyn. And if you're from Brooklyn, or if you've lived in Brooklyn, you might join the Diocese of Brooklyn, and then you'll almost always serve a church in Brooklyn or environs. But then you have religious orders, religious congregations more broadly, and they're not so much tied to place, they're tied to the charism, and they're tied to the community that they join. So like in my case, I joined the province of St. Joseph, which has territorial bounds, but we're just kind of here, there, and everywhere. But in effect, I've promised obedience within the setting of my community, so to be part of my community. So I live in a community of like 65 or 70 men. And I think part of that is, one of the things I love about being Christian is that's not so much a testimony of strength as it is an admission of weakness. C.S. Lewis has that point in Mere Christianity, where he says that the Christian is not often a better man, he's often a worse man, because it takes a certain degree of brokenness and then acknowledgement of brokenness to reach out in dependence upon God for your very life breath, the life of grace and virtue. And so, sometimes there's some misconceptions of like, look at these guys pretending to be Ubermenschen, pretending to be superheroes. That's not it. There's a sense in which I think to join religious life, you have to have a pretty keen appreciation of your weakness and your woundedness and your need for deliberate Christian community if you are going to be generous with your life and make of it a pleasing sacrifice. So I love it because you kind of come to community with this disposition of mendicancy or beggary. It's like you beg God for your life and you beg it in the presence of or in company with the brethren, which I find very precious. So, yeah.
And one more, and just on the Dominicans, I know you might be too humble to say this, but the Dominicans are sort of renowned for their education, right? Their process, the doctors of the church. Explain you have the cool initials when I say, I know Father Gregory Pine. Are you down with OP? You know me. And what is the order of preachers? So tell us about that.
Yeah, so It's called the Order of Basically, it's a 13th century thing, and I suppose there's a 21st, we're in the 21st century application. So when St. Dominic lived, most diocesan priests, that first category that we mentioned, and most religious priests didn't really have the right to preach because they just weren't as well educated, and they just kind of couldn't rely upon themselves or be relied upon to preach consistently and well that wouldn't confuse the faithful. So there's a kind of sense like, listen, just living your ordinary Christian life it'll be good, it'll be sufficient, but don't get into too many complexities because it just might confuse or confound the people of God. Bishops, they had permission, generally speaking, to preach. And so what St. Dominic saw was a need for more preaching because in the time that he lived, there were folks who were getting the gospel kind of strange and wrong. So there's a group called the Cathars, sometimes called the Albigensians, and they had it in their mind that everything material was bad, specifically that it was evil. And you end up with a lot of weird consequences, like the incarnation could not have happened because Christ wouldn't take flesh to himself. Flesh is evil. Or like marriage is bad. It's just a concession to the weakness of the flesh. Nothing good can come about of it because it makes more flesh. So crazy consequences. But St. Dominic realized that you needed educated preachers to kind of take some of these errors on. And so he obtained permission and then sought for his brothers an education to suit them to that preaching task. And so Dominicans, since the 13th century, have kind of always had that privilege. Again, not to say better than, it's just to say they fit within a particular part of the church, or we fit within a particular part of the church, which is especially, desirous of, open to that kind of doctrinal clarification, which sets people free.
So you are, in effect, the Ravenclaws of the Catholic Church.
I forgot to apply, actually. So thanks for bringing it around to some of the more important content. Ravenclaw, I think, is a safe bet. So at peace or at rest in the company of individuals like Cho Chang.
Okay. Amazing. Well, you and I met at a Catholic conference, shocker, I know. Yep. And you said something which I really appreciate, which is, I want to get into your story. I was introduced to you because I was, like any Protestant there, saying, I'm really having trouble understanding this doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, which I was surprised. I thought that referred to Jesus. Spoiler alert, it turns out that it also refers to Mary being sinless. And I thought, that doesn't, what? And so I asked another friend wearing a fellow habit, one of your brethren, and he said, "Oh, I know who can solve this for you. Let me introduce you to Father Pine." And he walks over, and you, I think, had just done several hours of ministry and were ready to go get an overpriced latte somewhere. And he said, "Hey, Father Pine, come explain the doctrine of Mary's sinlessness to this Protestant." And it was like Neo in the Matrix when he just learns a new skill, and you were just like, "My joy." And you summoned it up. And I've actually stolen that phrase because I deeply love that, because every time you're asked to do anything, it's my joy. So is that a Dominican thing? Is that your thing? Because it seems like you are, in a sense, just like, hey, I'm speaking out that I am a servant of God. And so if I have an opportunity to bless someone in God's name, I'm going to do it.
I think it's partially inspired by Chick-fil-A, but on account of the fact that they had staked out the My Pleasure territory, I wanted to be somewhat novel in my approach. But I also think it's like...
So it's not, I was hoping it was some mystical tradition and where you say, you speak first, my joy, and then the mind and the heart follow. No, but you're telling me that you basically just rip this off from Chick-fil-A.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of good things to rip off from Chick-fil-A, like Chick-fil-A sauce, which, by the way, is made of honey mustard and barbecue sauce. That breaks your experience open to you, does it not? Okay.
If we don't get them to sponsor this after this interview, I don't know what will.
But that'd be awesome if they did. They give away a lot of free food to charitable causes. I don't want to make this whole thing about Chick-fil-A, but you need to know.
I'm sensing a really interesting attachment to that. We'll
move on eventually, but probably 15 minutes after I die. Okay, so yes, my joy. I think that there's an early 20th century author who says that modern man is haunted by the fear that his real life is elsewhere. And, we find ourselves often saying, like, if I could just get through this, or if I could just get over that, then I'd be happy. Like, if I could just get myself financially stable, or if I could get myself into my whatever state of life, get myself married in Catholic circles, get myself in, like ordained or, professed in religious life, whatever it is. But the threat is that we end up looking past where God is, in fact, healing us and growing us, which is to say the present moment, in which His grace and virtue and gifts are made so abundantly available. And so I think sometimes, it's like you get tired and you get hungry and you get whatever else, we suffer various difficulties throughout the course of our life. And those often pose kind of temptations to look beyond the present to an ideal future in which all of our difficulties will be resolved. But I think it's important just to kind of see in the present moment an opportunity in which to love the Lord and to love those whom the Lord entrusts us. And maybe to say my joy is a little bit of a training in that. It's partly aspirational, but it's also like partly, just descriptive. I'm going to slow down.
It led to our friendship, which is great because you had to say my joy, and I think I knew you had to talk to me. And then we descended into Star Wars and any sort of Christological, truths that can be drawn from that original trilogy. Mm-hmm. We'll get to the other one.
Yeah.
So I have a few things I really want to talk to you about beyond your habits. And thank you for the Dominican primer, because I just find I think that's one of the things about being Protestant is that it's, your experience, even though there's a bunch of different Protestant churches, a lot of them you go to, it's a very similar setup, right? Where there's a Bible, there's usually now a Grammy Award winning band, there's great coffee, and it's a pretty unique experience. But when you start hanging around Catholic circles, right, you just threw out 9 different orders, which might as well be different Pokemon characters I've never heard of, right?
Snorlax.
And there's different words for everything. I had a good friend who's Catholic, and we prayed before a meal, and I said, Lord, thank you for divine appointments. And he goes, thank you for praying for us. What's a divine appointment? And I was like, a meeting. And he goes, oh. And I forget, there was a Catholic term he used, right? It was God's providence. And
exactly.
And
I was big into providence.
I was like, yeah, mine sounds better, know?
Yeah.
And he was like, oh yeah, I guess that's, so I wonder how much we are sometimes saying the same thing, but with different words. Although there are a lot more words, it seems.
Yeah.
It feels sometimes like Catholicism is intentionally making things more academic and tougher. Do you feel that's a fair criticism?
So I think, so here's my little defense. I come from the nerdier corner of ecclesial life, or from the nerdier neighborhood. So everyone with whom I hang out is kind of like, well, actually.
So you're the Big Bang Theory of Catholicism.
Yes, I don't know what that reference is, because
Great, okay.
Just as I don't watch TV, neither do you watch Taylor Swift or listen to Taylor Swift.
Fair point.
Yeah, okay. So I think hopefully the disposition which informs that is I want to know what's true, so that way I can conform my life to what's good. And if I can get fine-grained in my knowledge of the truth, well then, let's get after it. I think sometimes, this desire for further distinctions or for further clarifications can be a little bit dry and academic in its approach, and it can get into needless hair-splitting. But I think by and large, the desire for further inquiry is born of a hope that we can actually know God as He reveals Himself, and we can embrace God as He mediates Himself. So I think that there are different traditions in the church, and they'll describe mysteries under different rubrics. And some are completely content to say it's a mystery. You're just going to have to grapple with that fact and stop trying to shed light on what is obscure of its very nature. But my kind of disposition towards the mysteries is it's not that they're dark or obscure. It's that they're super luminous. They're super intelligible. We are not well equipped to inquire into those things because we're going to be totally overwhelmed by said luminosity and intelligibility. But it's also a joy to try, provided that we don't do so in a way that's proud or vainglorious or that's just kind of morally ugly. Provided we do so with the disposition like God, I'm here for it. Whatever you want to reveal, whatever you want to mediate, I'm signed up. I'm all in. I'm wearing the dress. Party on. But I have to be content to recognize that these things surpass me, that they transcend me. So if I start pretending like I've got it figured out, then I'm wrong. Or if I start pretending like I've comprehended God, then I'm wrong, because God is not compassed by my mind. He doesn't fit in my little head. So that's the disposition with which I approach it. So we have a lot of words and a lot of distinctions, some of which are helpful, some of which aren't as helpful. But the hope is that we get fine-grained, or we fine-tune, as it were, with this kind of disposition of openness to God's revelation and mediation.
Do you think so? As a priest, is there an expectation, and I'm trying to think of the parallel here on the Protestant side, but there are people, who have reputations as charismatic healers, et cetera, who, I expect a miracle from them. But do you find wearing, the habits and being in religious life, is there an expectation that you feel people place on you, be it Catholic or not, that there should be, that you should experience the miraculous a lot, or that you should see a lot of more answered prayers? Is that kind of idea that, the more religious someone is, the more God will show up in their life? Is that something you deal with?
Yeah, perhaps to a certain extent. I think, so I'm a big apostle of the ordinary, which isn't to say that the extraordinary isn't cool. It is cool. I think often of the way that St. Augustine reads the second chapter of the Gospel of John, those first 11 verses which narrate the miracle of the wedding feast at Cana. He says, what's going on here? Our Lord takes water and he makes it wine instantaneously, miraculously. He says, let's zoom out for a second. He doesn't use that language, but let's zoom out for a second. And then let's consider how you ordinarily get wine. Okay? Well, rain falls, it waters the vineyard, grapes grow, they're gathered, crushed, fermented, and you get wine. But in effect, water becomes wine. So there's a sense in which what God does miraculously, the extraordinary, highlights for us how awesome, in a certain sense, is the ordinary. And I think that miracles often bring about a kind of revolution of grace in a person's life, but they also draw our attention to the quiet, the unseen, the hidden movements of grace that are often afoot in the human heart in ways that are largely undetectable, but still awesome. And so my own life, there haven't been tons of miracles, and I haven't been able to deliver miracles for those who expect them of me. But I do feel convicted that I'm meant to minister in ordinary fashion the grace of God. And I think that's one of the gifts of being a priest. You know, some people have negative reactions to priests, for which there are plenty of reasons. A lot of people have a positive reaction to a priest, regardless of whether they're Catholic or Protestant or of another faith tradition. And I think that people have a kind of sense at some level that you're the guy who gives me God, or you're the guy who ought to give me God. And so there's this beautiful vulnerability that people often bring in conversation and in petition. You know, can you pray for this? Or I've got this thing, can you hear me out? And I find that, I just try to pour into those experiences by a simple presence and, offer a prayer or impart a blessing or do whatever I can. But just to treasure those people, because in treasuring those people, it signifies, and I think it makes real the fact that God treasures those people. Because I think a priest ought to make God close. He ought to make God near. Not that God is distant, but he feels to us at certain times as if he were distant. And part of, I think, the mercy of the priesthood, at least as I've experienced in my life, is to bring that to bear. Namely, the nearness of God, the presence of God.
Everyone's searching for something. They're just looking in the wrong places for the right thing.
I've struggled in all the ways they're struggling. I've drank from the broken cisterns that they're drinking from.
They've had everything the world has to offer, and they're done with it.
Our prayers were focused on Gen Z, breaking the chains of anxiety and depression off of this generation.
I'll never forget what I saw. Thousands of students around this body of water.
We baptize in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Something has been happening on campuses across the nation.
And see them come back out of the water, and they're like, I'm made new in Christ. It is beautiful.
There's so many people that don't know their love, that don't know that they can live free of anxiety, free of depression.
I was atheist until 3 years ago when Christ called my name.
Yeah. It's revival. It's a movement. And I still think it's just getting started.
See more at therevivalgeneration.com.
So obviously on this show, we do like to highlight miracles, and it's tough because I think from Scripture, if you read, especially the early church, right, it seems like the miracles, by definition, they have to be rare. Otherwise, they wouldn't be miracles, sure. Right? But also, they seem to be a regular occurrence of a lot of, if you walk with Christ enough, you're going to need a miracle, right? Mm-hmm. And I always think about we need miracles as much today as we did back then. And so you mentioned, not having a ton, but have there been any miracles? I know, the fact that you're still here, is a miracle. And that's true for all of us. It's a miracle every day. But you actually have a story where it is actually a miracle that you're actually sitting here with us today. So maybe this is a good segue, and you could tell us that story.
Sure. Yeah. So I like hiking. I have liked hiking for, at this stage of the game, a little more than half of my life. And I would say that, just by natural disposition, I like to get to the top of high mountains, and I like to navigate my way through difficult circumstances. So I'm often pushing myself perhaps more than prudence would dictate is appropriate. And as a result of which, I found myself in a lot of...
And you wonder why I declined some of your hiking invitations after this. But yeah, so you found yourself off the beaten path.
Yeah, I found myself off the beaten path. And there was a time actually, so between 2020 and 2023, I was assigned in Switzerland. I was studying for a doctorate at the University of Freiburg. But Switzerland's a small country, and wherever you are in the country, you're a stone's throw away from some of the most beautiful hikes in the whole wide world. And so when I went over there, a close friend counseled me not to work on the weekends. He said, you're going to be writing this 600-page book. It's going to be totally overwhelming and world-consuming, and the temptation is going to be to work on said book every minute of every hour of every day, and you have to resist that or it will ruin your life. So you need to stake out time for leisure, for worship. Obviously, the worship is built into a religious life, but you need to stake out time for sanity, otherwise you'll lose a hold of it. So I said, hey, sounds like sound advice. So I would go hiking basically every Saturday. And the community of 20 men had 3 cars. So provided that one of those cars was available, I could just hop in and be at a trailhead within 40, 50, 60 minutes. And it was great. So I just played a lot in the mountains. And I made some bad choices, but for the most part, I could extricate myself from those bad choices.
When you say a bad choice, meaning I'm going to try this trail, and it's not so much a trail as it is a general direction.
Yeah, so my first kind of compromised position, I was in the Kiental Valley. So for those of you who have been to Switzerland, I was in the canton of Bern, and the main valley that runs through Bern is called the Emmental. And then there's all these little valleys that come off the Emmental, and this little guy is called the Kiental. And I was trying to go to the top of this mountain, which I think was called the Gifferspitz or doesn't matter. But I was trying to get to the top of it, and this fog rolled in, and you got to the point where the ground looked a lot like the sky, and I couldn't differentiate between them. And I'm looking at the topographical map, and I recognize that once I get to the top of this mountain, there's a pretty sheer drop just on the other side of it. So when you arrive at the point where you're getting to the top of a mountain on hands and knees, you know that you're in a compromised position. So yeah, things like that. I would just do things like that probably with greater frequency than prudence demands. So my second year there, it had been November of 2021. I was due to take a hike. I don't actually know the name of the valley, but it's in the area around Verbier. Again, for those who know Switzerland, that's one of the adventure sport capitals of the country. And it's not too far from the Grand Saint Bernard, which is one of the passes through which you can pass from Switzerland to Italy. It's the pass that Hannibal took. It's the pass that Napoleon took. It's a pass that a lot of cool people took. So I was in that region in the valley of the little town from which I departed was called Fionnet. And in Switzerland, basically from the 3rd or 4th week of October onward, if you're going to get up above 1,000 meters, you need something like snowshoes or crampons or skis, because there's usually a decent bit of accumulation by that time. And I knew this, and I'd been prepared for this from past hikes, but every once in a while, I was leaving the house in great haste, and I might have forgotten my snowshoes 2 or 3 times, and this was one of those times. So I'd woken up, I'd prayed for an hour in the presence of the Lord, and then I'd celebrated Mass and said some of my morning prayers, and then I'd hopped in the car, but I had failed to stow my snowshoes. And I was 35 minutes into a trip, which might have been a total of an hour, and I was I do not want to turn back and come back and burn those 70 minutes, because then that means I won't be able to hike as far or as high. It won't be as beautiful as the sight at the top. So what I'll do is I'll just hope for a decently clean trail. And when I get to the point where I'm wading through snow, I'll push myself, and then I'll just turn around and come on back home. Because if you don't have snowshoes, it's not like you're going to find yourself in trouble necessarily, but you just might get to a point at which it's intraversable, it's impassable. So I arrived at my trailhead having committed one error or having made one mistake. And then I made my second mistake, because there are 2 apps that I used on my phone with all of the trails in Switzerland as part of their database or automatically uploaded. But one of those you can't download offline. The other you can download offline. I preferred the one where you couldn't download offline because the trails were all clearly marked in a way that I found aesthetically pleasing. But nevertheless, I would always use the other one as a backup just in case I would lose signal, because then you can locate yourself on the map irrespective of whether or not you're within striking distance of a cell tower. So I'd failed to do that. I didn't download my map offline for use. But usually, like, if the trails are decently well marked, which they tend to be in Switzerland, it's not like, it's not the most devastating thing in the whole wide world. So again, it didn't give me occasion to turn back. So I just clipped on along. So I started at like 1,500 meters and I wound my way up the south side of the mountain, which happens to be the sunny side of the mountain, for like the first half of the day. And it was beautiful. There was only like a little bit of accumulation. And for a while I was hiking next to this glacier, which was huge, and just kind of, it gives this primordial feel to the whole experience where it's like blur, you know. Things have been going on in this valley for a long time. I was listening to Anna Karenina, which is, you know, some kind of nihilistic devastation to get the blood flowing. Her life was unraveling.
As one does.
As one does, yeah. Her life was unraveling, and little did I know, so too was my life. At that point, it was probably like, I don't know, 35 degrees Fahrenheit. It was just above freezing. And I was coming up to the summit, which was in fact like a saddle between two peaks. And then I was going to drop back down on the other side of the mountain, which is to say the north side of the mountain, which is to say the shady side of the mountain. And at that point, I was just doing right well. In Switzerland, they talk about microclimates because from valley to valley, you can have very, very distinct weather systems. And it could be like, I mean, you could be on the south side of the mountain in the canton of Ticino, and it might be, you know, 50 degrees. And then you cross that ridge, north side of the mountain in Graubünden, and it could be like -10. So it just depends on the wind. It depends on the microclimate. And so I came up over the saddle into the opposite valley, the valley that I intended to descend through. And it was like a huge drop in temperature, a really stiff wind. And it was clear to me that all the snow that had been accumulating in this region was accumulating in this valley. So at that point, it's like, it was just kind of bewildering. So, you know, I put a buff up on my face and I put on another layer or whatever it was and just tried to trundle my way through. But now instead of a couple of inches of snow, there's a couple of feet of snow. So like the book of the prophet Ezekiel, it was now up to my hips. And at that point, something else happened, which seemed minor at the time, but, you know, once you make mistake after mistake after mistake, the pain starts to accumulate. So I would drink water out of a hydration bladder, and you've got that hose that comes up over your shoulder and you bite the nib, and usually it goes all just fine and dandy. But if it's below freezing, you're supposed to push any water in the hose back into the bladder with each sip. Otherwise, it can flash freeze. So I came up over that rise, walked through that saddle, hit that colder temperature and that stiff wind, and my bladder immediately flash froze. Which again, you know, I can just take my bladder out of the backpack and I can drink it from the side from which it's not intended to dispense and be fine. It's like no big deal. But I'm going to do that less frequently. And so I'm going to start getting dehydrated. And then I'm going to have difficulty eating food because it feels like sawdust in my mouth. And with all of that just accumulated fatigue and disgust, it just gets harder to think straight. So having put myself in a lot of really bad hiking situations previously, I was sensible enough to not make big, bad decisions at this stage of the game. But even still, I was in a rough spot. So like the whole trail was covered in like 2-3 feet of snow. And I had a screenshot, in effect, of where the trail ought to go. So I had a general sense for trajectory, and I had a compass, and I had an altimeter. So I knew the basic profile of how things ought to look. But I just had a lot of difficulty finding my way forward because in this valley, it was pretty sheer. And it's the type of thing where you can't just roll down the mountain. You have to pick out the trail which has been cleared for you by those who prepared it. Otherwise, you're just gonna find yourself in a real tight spot. So I was trying to find the markers, which in Switzerland are fairly well defined, and having a rough go of it. And I was trying not to depart too far from the markers at any given point, lest coming down the mountain in the wrong direction, I then have to work my way up the mountain and then just exhaust myself and then, just die of exposure. So I came up over the saddle probably at about like 1:30. And I spent what was in effect like the next 2+ hours trying to find the trail along a distance of not much more than like 300 yards. So I was just going up and down that trail, trying to see if I could identify things from new vantages, trying to take turns, which my map indicated ought to be available, but always doing so at the wrong point and basically coming up against a sheer drop, the type of thing that I could not navigate on 2 feet. And then it was at that point, maybe like an hour and a half into the adventure, where I started hearing in the valleys, in that region, I started hearing what sounded to me like avalanches, which is unpleasant. Because, it's the type of thing where if you're with someone else, which I wasn't, and if you're well equipped for it, and if you have all the proper technology, you have about, like a 1 in 5 chance of making it out. If you're not, you have like a 0 in a
best bet, I got 20% chance that I'm going to survive an avalanche with you. That's with all the gear.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So
on your own, without the gear, with just your golden compass.
With my golden compass. Yeah.
And your altimeter.
I was very scared. I to the point where at that stage of the game, I just started praying continually. I'd already turned my audiobook off at that point because I wanted to be sensitive to all the data that I could collect. But I just started kind of praying continuously, just asking the Lord for help, for guidance, for indications, praying through the intercession of the Blessed Virgin for maternal care. Because like when I feel especially exposed or like especially tender, I think of my mom. So at that, like the first time that I heard it, I like dove behind a boulder because I thought it was in my valley. It was like that loud and that disturbing.
What does an avalanche sound like?
It sounds like a jet going over your head.
Oh, it's that loud.
Yeah. Maybe not. Yeah.
Does it start off as like
it's a low rumble and then it just picks up. Yeah. So unpleasant. And then it was at that point where the proverbial fog started rolling in. Not proverbial fog, the real fog started rolling in. So it's like sometimes you look out over a range of mountains and you see ranks or you see rows. They get deeper blue or purple as you go back. But with weather systems, you can see them disappear. And so I was looking out on the horizon and there's a big mountain in the distance there, which the Grand Combin, which disappeared. And so this system is rolling in on me. And it's not necessarily going to beat me up because it's going to be snow, but it is going to make visibility really interesting. So I was at that point kind of like, I was starting to get scared. And like you have various factors that you take into play because there's this community back at home. I didn't give them sufficient indication of where I was going. They're going to start worrying about me. They're going to mistrust my prudence. I'm going to have all of these rules leveled on me. I'm not going to be able to hike. I'm going to get sent home to the United States. I'm not going to be able to finish my doctorate. I'm going to die in a gutter, because,
These are all your last thoughts you're having.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't remember exactly what I thought at that point because I haven't retained most of those memories. But
so you legit, were you like, hey, I think this could be the end?
I didn't think I was going to die because at that stage of the game, so you can make it through a night in those circumstances, but you just have to walk continually because if you lie down, your core temperature drops, the chances of hypothermia increase, and then you start losing digits and stuff like that. So I'd been, we'll have a flashback here in a second. I'd been in hypothermic conditions before, and I knew what was demanded of me. I just didn't want to spend the whole night walking back and forth with no guarantee that the weather would have passed in the morning and that I would have any better chance. So I was like, this gets ratcheted up because I had a subscription to a rescue service, but yeah, they just don't like idiots, and I was being an idiot in the sense that like I wasn't sufficiently prepared and I ought to have known better, and I think I was embarrassed. I was mortified. And I just didn't want people to know. So I wanted to minimize damage insofar as I could. And these things are all, like I hadn't gotten to the point where it was like, just forget if I get embarrassed. I just need to get off this mountain. I hadn't yet gotten to it, but I was kind of getting into that space. So as aforementioned or as promised, flashback. I had been in a similar situation of a similar gravity once before in my life. I'd done a lot of dumb things in the mountains, but usually dumb things that had a 15-minute life cycle. I had done one dumb thing that had a 2-day life cycle. I was hiking in the White Mountains. I had been there with a buddy. We were planning on doing a 5-day traverse of the Presidential Range, which doesn't merit 5 days, but we were going to drop down below tree line with each night and camp and blah, blah, blah. And it had gone great for the first couple of days. Day 1, no problem. Day 2, no problem. Day 3 is when things went sour because we went to the top of Mount Washington, which is famous for having the worst weather, some people say in the world, but let's say in the eastern United States, with wind speeds recorded to 230 miles per hour and things like that. So I got to the top of Mount Washington and it was actually beautiful that day. And I was like, wow, we are lucking out. And then we dropped down, towards Lake of the Clouds. And then we picked up this dry river trail and we were planning to camp at one of those 3-sided lean-tos that the Appalachian Trail makes available to through hikers. But it was May. There was accumulation, again, south side of the mountain, sunny side of the mountain, spells, problems. And I was insufficiently prepared. That was like my first big hike in the United States. I just caught the bug because I had done a semester abroad in Europe. And now for the first time, I was playing and I was loving, but I wasn't knowing. And so after like an hour and a half of descending and not really having any indication that we were on the right trail, that we're going in the right direction, that we're making any progress, my buddy said to me, we should turn back. And I said, quote, nah, dude, I feel good about it. End quote. Shortly thereafter, I hadn't been paying attention to my feet. I hadn't laced my boot up, and it was getting loose because my feet were getting frozen and I wasn't sensing the slippage. And I looked down. At that point, we had been post-holing, so like foot crushes through the snow and you have to like pull up and keep going. Foot crushes through the snow, keep up, keep going. I had lost a boot, right? So because I had been post-holing, hadn't been paying attention to my shoes, had let it get unlaced, was a frozen-footed monster, I'd lost my shoe, which is bad. And at this stage of the game, it's like 5:30 in the afternoon. My buddy was justly really frustrated with me. And so we made the decision to camp that night and then to hike out the next morning. The plan was to start at 8, and if we hadn't found any solid indication by 10 a.m. that we were going to call search and rescue. So we effectuated our plan. I did my best to bind up my foot, but I was scared and I was undernourished and I was underhydrated and I was making stupid decisions. I was 19. And when it came time, 10 a.m. to call search and rescue, they effectively told us that we don't have personnel to get to you. And so I was like, okay, I guess we're hiking out for the rest of the day. But in that moment, and this is pertinent to the conversation into which we will relaunch, I'd had the opportunity to call my family. And I chose not to because I said, one, they'll just worry. And two, they can't really do anything. So in a certain sense, it would be a burden for them, a burden that they don't need to carry because we still have a viable hope of hiking out and making our way to safety in the course of this day. And so we gave it a go. We were just hiking basically in the river because it was the clearest pass for us. At that stage of the game, 2, 3, 4 feet of accumulation on the banks, and it was just such slow going. But gradually, everything that I used to bind up my foot was coming to pieces, and eventually my foot was just kind of coming to pieces. So, like frostbite setting in, and then like, I won't describe things for people who have, sensitive stomachs, but it was bad. And so we had said that we were going to stop again at 6 p.m. that night. And we hiked continuously from 10 a.m. through 6 p.m. in this riverbed, just making our way downhill, hopefully out to civilization by the best indication of the map that we had and the compass that we were following. And 6 o'clock rolls around and we still hadn't found anything good. 6:05, 6:10, 6:15. We're not having the conversation because we don't want to have the conversation because we know it's like freezer burn. If you defrost ice cream and then refreeze ice cream, it goes bad. Similar thing happens with human flesh. So it's like, we've got one shot at getting this thing right with my foot. Otherwise, it'll just be real rough. And eventually, like 6:20 p.m., we saw footprints. And I was like, Bobby, I see footprints. And it turned out that we followed those footprints out for like the next 3 hours and eventually hit the road, hitchhiked back to our cars, debriefed with like wildlife services or Fish and Game, and then drove through the night, like midnight onward. We got as far as North Jersey. We were going to southeastern Pennsylvania before I checked myself into a hospital. And I was in the hospital for a couple of days with, like, the equivalent of third-degree burns, but real bad frostbite, and just like yada, yada, thus and such. Okay, so I'd had the experience before, and in this moment, I was having flashbacks. And the thing that was wild was that while in that moment, like flashback to when I was 19, I recognized that I oughtn't call my family because one, they couldn't do anything, and two, they would just worry. That my circumstances now, flash forward to Switzerland, had changed. Because that was November 2021. In September of 2021, my mom had passed away. She had been diagnosed 2 years previously with pancreatic cancer, and she had put up like a very noble fight to afford us, I think, more than her time, just to kind of grieve, to acclimate, to love her, and then, to lose her. And there was just like this sweet thing where a kind of recognition of the communion of the saints and the fact that I could like talk to my mom. Even though she had passed from this world, I could talk to my mom. That's not to like canonize my mom or refer to her as Saint Gina of Newtown, although we do sometimes. But I realized that like she wouldn't worry, because there's no worry in heaven. And that she could do something in a certain sense. Not in that she could do something that Christ couldn't, but that like her love for me was somehow more potent in this moment. And I felt that I ought to appeal to it. And so at that moment, I'd been praying to the Lord, I'd been praying to Our Lady. And I just said like a little prayer to my mom, basically like, if you can, help me in this situation. And in that moment, like within 5 seconds, I saw a marker that I hadn't seen to that point. So I'd been going up and down this same 300-yard trajectory for, at that point, like 2 hours, and I just hadn't seen this thing, which lay in the direction of the trail that I eventually wanted to follow. And so I trundled on towards that marker, and then from the vantage of that marker, I saw footprints. The thing about the footprints that I found, is like astonishing at the time and still astonishing now, is that those footprints came from the valley floor. So they were footprints going uphill, and they stopped right at that marker. So it was like, in that moment, like what washed over me was the recognition that it was like she had come for me. And so I spent, again, like the next 2.5 hours following those footprints. And it wasn't like a clear thing at various points, because you're going over rocks and like various topography that breaks them up and stuff like that. And it's like human footprints here, and then it's like weird small woodland creature footprints there. And I'm still using my compass. I'm still using my altimeter. I'm still using the vestiges of the map that I was able to retain. I'm like doing my best to keep food down. I'm trying my best to hydrate. And it's still somewhat harrowing of a situation. I made a wrong turn at one point. I had to, make my way back. But I wended my way finally off the mountain. And then I hit the valley floor just as the lights were coming on in town. And so, yeah, just super grateful to God and grateful to my mom. I got in the car and drove my way home. And I think that, like, as I've thought about the experience, not to like anticipate interpretation of it, I think something that I find so beautiful is that my understanding of intercession isn't that you appeal to saints because you're asking them to do something that Christ can't. You appeal to saints because God, in his loving kindness, has seen fit to draw you to him in the setting of the Christian community. That God loves you so much that he will give you access to all manner of good things. Like to a mother, to a father, to brothers, to sisters. Yeah, to people with whom you can journey through this life. And so it was like, my experience wasn't that I'd been praying to Jesus for 2 hours and he hadn't been listening to my prayers, and then I prayed to my mom, like a quasi-goddess, and then she did listen to my prayers. It was like the Lord, in his loving kindness, in his mercy, saw fit to let me experience the effects of my foolishness, the effects of my idiocy. And then, as I understand it, to answer my prayer in a way through the intercession of my mom. It's him answering the prayer. It's him working through her. But it's because he wants to involve her in my life, because I just, like 2 months previously, I lost my mom. And it's just not clear how my mom is still involved in my life. So like in that tender moment where I'm feeling most vulnerable, where I'm feeling most exposed, it's by appeal to the one to whom I would ordinarily turn that prayer was answered, and I found my way off that mountain. So, yeah.
So glad you made it off the mountain. Do you remember the hot shower after that, or the first meal coming?
I do. Yeah, there's this beautiful American family, or American Swiss family, who had invited me and another brother to their house for dinner that night, and it was just like a taste of shocked bizarro world, where like I had just been in these super savage conditions, like primordial ice flow, and then just terrible weather system, and then kind of real fear that I was going to suffer through a very lonely night, and then deliverance of a miraculous sort. And then you're just seated around the table with this precious family with their 4 kids, as they recount to you the things that they learned in their Sunday school and stuff. And it's like, wow.
Man. No, I love that. I mean, intercession of the saints is something that, we had Father Barton and Gabe Castillo on the show, and that was a really beautiful moment where Abby had shared that there's times where it seems like a natural human thing. Abby lost her mom as well, and it's interesting that it seems to be a pretty common human experience to like talk to your loved ones, and it's almost like, do you think there's just an inherent truth that humans know, even if we're not experiencing that, the way it should be is that death shouldn't be a thing? Like, I loved you, you were part of my life, you have to still be there.
Yeah.
Like, I should still be able to talk to you. And that's like, a lot of the criticism I know with intercession of the saints too is like, Bible's really clear. You do not talk to dead people, despite what Bruce Willis tells us, right? But the reality is, right, that our hope is that, no, they're alive. And maybe one of the beauties of your story is that it was God's also a reminder of like, hey, your mom's up here with me.
Yeah.
And that there's this great reunion coming.
Yeah. I think like the kind of Catholic sensibility is that, this is a shared sensibility that the church, it exists on earth and in heaven. Catholics would add in purgatory as well. And that there is a kind of communion that exists amongst the members of the church, irrespective of whether they're on earth or in heaven or in purgatory. And that, there's a real kind of caution advanced about just addressing whatsoever that lies beyond our experience of the here and now. Because there's a risk, that you might invoke something over which you don't have control or which may not be on the same team as the Lord. But I think like the Catholic idea with saints is that these people have lived such a beautiful life, such a wonderful life, and that it signifies a real closeness to God. And so we hope, we trust that they are with the Lord. And so in appealing to them, we're appealing to the communion of the saints, we're appealing to the company of those who enjoy the vision of God, and that our appeal isn't so much motivated by superstition in the sense that like if you rub your rabbit foot this way or if you roll your lucky dice that way, but like this recognition that God attends to us in all of our human needs and that He's enough, like He is sufficient beyond any shadow of a doubt. Our relationship with Him is perfect and lacking for nothing. But the like logic of abundance that the incarnate order seems to reveal or seems to mediate is this, there's a certain recognition there that God provides for us even beyond what is necessary. God provides for us even beyond what is called for, Like we could have come into this world without a father and mother. We could have just sprouted full grown from the leg of Zeus like a Greek god. That's a reference to Bacchus, I think. Okay. But God willed that we come into this world through a mother and a father in a certain sense so as to bind us up with them in love so that we have the confidence that we've been brought into this world by, in good circumstances, two people who love each other and who love us and who are going to stick around for each other and stick around for us. And so I think like the communion of the saints betrays something of that logic as well, or it mediates something of that logic that we're meant to be with them beyond the grave, that we're meant to be with them for all eternity.
Yeah, and I guess I've always been curious too, because there's part of, we haven't really gotten too much into this, but, there's a whole, for lack of a better term, miracle investigation arm with the Catholic Church where y'all will go and actually there's an office, right, that's tasked with actually investigating modern day miracles as it pertains to the intercession of the saints. So like in your mom's case, for example, if this happened to a couple people, they could actually go petition, right, their bishop and say, hey, I think Father Pine's mom is, the patron saint of hikers. Let's look into her.
Typically in those investigations, they're looking for ways to rule out natural explanations. In my case, because I am a fool, because I am an idiot, it may have just been that I wasn't paying sufficient attention to that region of the mountain or like that particular part of the trail. So I think those individuals would say like, we can't use this, as a case or as part of the case to build for your mother's canonization. And I don't think that case is in the works necessarily. But I think that what they're trying to do there is their due diligence in an effort to say like, there's something really going on here and there isn't a natural way, or at least we don't have access to a natural way by which to account for it. And so that's meant to bolster our faith. That's meant to direct us in awe and wonder back to God who accomplishes such marvelous things through His beloved friends.
Mm. One thing about your story too is because when we talk about miracles in the show, we want to celebrate those times when God does interrupt the process, right? Because I was thinking about this even this morning. Like Lazarus was raised from the dead, but Lazarus would go back into his tomb at one point.
Yeah.
Right. It was not, and the blind man would go blind again.
Yeah.
Or would, his eyes would be shut again. And so there is this weird tension there that we ask for miracles. But also we know the Christian life is also tough. And that's like one of the promises, right? Jesus, it seems like, you'll get some cool stuff that happens if you follow Christ, but also like very explicitly, you'll face many trials if you follow me. I'm curious, you've had 2 close encounters now, so this does suggest that an all-trail sponsorship is not on the table for you.
I'm open to the prospect. Yeah, it might help me.
I don't think they are. But, having almost died twice now, I'm curious. This is a weird weird question to ask, but as a priest and someone who spends so much time in religious life and has had these near calls, like, how does that frame your thinking around death, et cetera? Like, is that something you fear, or because I think a lot of times when we chase miracles, a lot of times we're asking for God, like, hey, please heal us so we don't die.
Yeah.
Right. And I have found myself caught up in a tension there where it's like, God doesn't want anyone to die per se, right? But if we believe what we believe, we know that there's another iteration.
Yeah.
And so there's this prayer, God, teach me to count my days. How am I mindful of the fact that I could? And it's probably healthy to be able to make peace and say, if I go, like if you're on that mountain and you're telling me all those scary thoughts, but also at some level, it's probably healthy to say, if I got to go, like my soul's ready, right?
Yeah. I think I have 2 thoughts. The first is that With prayer petition, I think that sometimes we're asking God for something which we may in fact want more than God. And I think when that happens, we're on shaky ground. Because I think of this distinction that St. Augustine drew. He said there are certain things that we use and certain things that we enjoy. And the things that we're meant to enjoy are not meant to be used. So like when we go to God asking God for something that we want more than Him, there's a kind of imbalance to that, or there's a kind of strangeness to that, because what could we possibly want more than God? Objectively speaking, He's the most wantable there is. But subjectively speaking, it's for us to mature in that recognition. Nevertheless, God tells us to ask for things. And so I think that when we ask for things, we should be asking for things as kind of currency of His love, or testimony or indication of His love. So it should be, fueled by trust, or it should come from a disposition of trust. Like, Lord, I know that you have my best in mind, that you have my best in heart, and that you will for me what is good, and that all things work together for the good for those who love you and are called according to your purpose. And I entrust myself to you whatsoever you will. So like, I want to be healed. And part of that is because I probably want to evade the difficulty of physical malady. And part of that is because I really can't, I have great difficulty offering my life or sacrificing my life in its current configuration, because I spend so much psychological and emotional energy just dwelling on the fact that I'm not at 100%. And I realize that I have to mature, and I realize that I have to grow, and I'm willing to do that by your grace. But I want you. I want you at the end of the day. And I also want this thing. I want this thing if it's from you, and if it leads back to you, and if it reaffirms my relationship with you. And so I think it's just like, it's a kind of sensitive matter not to go to God to ask for something that you want more than God, because again, that can be like imbalanced or ever so slightly strange. And so I think that like when we pray these prayers to be delivered from death, or when we pray these prayers, truth be told, like everything that we encounter in this life, every expression of difficulty is a kind of faint indication of death. Like all of these punishments seem to signal for us the coming of that most terrible of punishments. Because it's like a sports injury. It's like, I'm not going to be able to perform at the level that I used to. Or like a malady that has lingering effects, like I'm not going to be able to get back to where I was. All of these give us an indication of the death that is to come. And so I think that in our approach to those things and in our approach to death, the goal is to want God more, right? To take it as an occasion whereby to want God more, and to be content with God's will insofar as it dictates the terms of our life. I was writing a letter to a friend the other day, and in the letter, I didn't mean to like end in nihilistic fashion, but in the letter I said, like, I don't know how much longer I'm going to live, not because I'm necessarily, accident prone, or I suppose I'm a little bit accident prone.
I was as a fair assessment, given your hiking history.
Yeah, okay. But like, I have difficulty envisioning what my future holds, and that might be lack of creativity or lack of ambition or whatever, but like, I don't feel like there's anything left for me to do, in the sense that I can do a lot more lather, rinse, repeat. And I'm completely content to do for the kingdom what God wills that I do for the kingdom. But I also have the sense like God can do whatever He wants through whatever means He deems fitting. He can save them Himself. He can save them through someone else. And it's like, okay, but it's for you to grow in your relationship with the Lord. It's for you to make good use of this time. Absolutely. But the Lord could also mature me in whatsoever way He wants. It seems that the ordinary human course is a kind of agonizing and somewhat anguished course, but like it need not be so. So like, I think about that sometimes, and there's a part of that that's sad, I think it's easier for folks who get married, who have children, who have grandchildren, because there's a kind of clear sense of living for those whom you love and who are related to you, flesh and blood. Whereas, for a celibate, it's a different dynamic, But like, I think that that's not yet a perfect disposition vis-a-vis death. I think that in a certain sense, the Christian matures to a point where he or she strains for death, like strains towards that plenary realization of that consummate relationship with the Most High God. And that doesn't mean that like death isn't bad. Death is bad, and we do fear it on some level, but that we can experience a joy and anticipation of heaven, which keeps that fear in check and even overwhelms that fear by a yet more potent affection. And so, I think that like there's an ancient Christian practice of preparing for death, of thinking about your death and thinking about the way in which you need to clean up your affairs or impose order on your household so as to be ready for the Lord at His coming. Because He comes like a thief in the night, not in the sense that He's trying to catch us off guards, but in the sense that He wants to cultivate in us a disposition of vigilance so that we can be on the lookout for Him. because there's a real risk that we just get kind of tired or distracted or addicted or whatever and look away, and the Lord wants us to hold his gaze now and unto ages of ages. And so I think that, meditation on death can be profitable in that spirit.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like you still need to do that Hallmark card line that we talked about. I do want to do a little bit of a hard pivot here because, I love doing because you were nice enough to bring a copy of your book.
That's a gift. That's yours.
Well, okay. Hopefully it's signed. It's a relic now. And, your Eucharistic identity. I know we have to make our initial descent here into our airport and land the plane, but I do, without opening up too much of a can of worms here, because I know this is an area of significant divergence theologically for Protestants and Catholics, but could you give us just a little bit of a primer on the Catholic position on the Eucharist, and then why you felt blessedly burdened to write this book? And I'm going to make you talk about it since you're so shy on this.
Thank you. So actually, I would say that the approach is ecumenical in the sense that, so sometimes in Protestant Catholic conversations, we define ourselves by contrariety, or we define ourselves in negative terms. So I'll just take ownership for Catholic stances. Sometimes Catholics will say, well, Protestants say that we're justified by faith, so I guess we're justified by works. And that's not true. We are justified by faith. A faith that breathes forth love, a love which is made manifest and communicable in works, but by faith. It's right there in the letter to the Romans.
I agree.
And so I think you see sometimes a similar disposition in sacramental theology. And so, Catholics will say, like, Protestants think that, the sacraments are just signs. So they can't possibly be signs. They're just realities. And I think that's wrong. So the sacraments are signs. They're signs of sacred things that make men holy. So there's signs that are especially powerful and potent that realize real changes in the lives of believers, but they remain signs. And so my approach in this book was really to kind of crack open or to give extended time to the signs that are at work in the Eucharistic liturgy. And so we point to three main signs, and one points to the past, one points to the present, and one points to the future. So with respect to the past, so I don't know how this kind of cuts across denominations or ecclesial communions, but in the Catholic Eucharistic liturgy, the body and the blood, or so the bread and the wine are consecrated, or the blessing is prayed over them separately. And that's meant to signify that our Lord shed his blood on Calvary. So his blood was separated from his body because he shed every drop of blood for love of us. And so when we do that twofold consecration and signify the Lord's shedding of blood, that makes his passion present to us. All right, that brings his passion to bear, specifically the power of his passion, the merits of his passion, to use a more kind of Catholic term. So that's with respect to the past. And then with respect to the present, we can say, all right, like, why is it that we choose bread and wine? Well, especially in the time that our Lord lived, but still in our present time, these are kind of symbols of ordinary nourishment and festivity. It's like you break bread with somebody when you want to have with them a meaningful exchange over food. Or, the scriptures talk about wine as associated with hilarity, as associated with delight, as associated with enjoyment. So we choose signs which signify nourishment and festivity, and those communicate to us the graces and virtues which bring that to bear in our life. And so we associate the Eucharistic liturgy especially with love, with charity. It's a kind of love feast, an agape meal. And so the idea is that it would kindle those graces, those virtues, and that it would fan them into flame so that we would burn more brilliantly for love of the Lord. And then with respect to the future, St. Augustine says, let's look at the way that these things are made. Out of many grains, we make one loaf. Out of many grapes, we fill one chalice. So, out of many Christians, we make one church. The idea is that the celebration of the Eucharistic liturgy is a cause of our union. It brings us together. It makes us one in the mystical body, such that head and members, we might constitute the one worshiping Christ. So the basic idea here is, I just want to help people pay attention to what God is doing in their midst, so that in opening their minds, they might in turn open their hearts and receive more abundantly what's on offer in the Eucharistic liturgy.
I love it. And Eucharist means just thanksgiving, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I know, it's funny. I told you earlier, I couldn't pronounce that term for years. I kept calling it Eurochrist, which is not theologically or phonetically accurate.
Yeah.
In no way, shape, or form. Last question here, Father Pine, since I know you spend so much time doing college ministry and working with young people, and so good luck. Curious that, but I know we've talked about young people searching for identity, and so much of, I think today, a lot of the Christian pursuit is, who am I? What am I supposed to do? What am I made for? And it's just an entirely different existence. I think about if we grew up in St. Dominic's time, it was like, I'm going to farm and hopefully that water falls down and the plants grow and I eat. And your friends die at 30.
Yeah.
Right. But today it's like, well, do I have my retirement account set up so I can go like hike, Machu Picchu at 60? And we just have an entirely different way of thinking about this. So how do you counsel young people today who are wrestling with these deep questions about like what they're supposed to do with their lives in the context of, hey, you're a Christian, so you have certain things to do, but also there's this idea that God has a specific plan for your life as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so I cast the book in terms of identity because it's a question that many people are asking. And you can see people ask it in different sectors of society with different degrees of urgency. But it's clear, like it's a common human desire to know who you are and what you're for, to have some certainty and confidence as to your purpose in life. And I think like in the ordinary course, that identity, that mission would be revealed and mediated to you by your relationships, in the sense that like you're born into this family, you live in this town, you're a member of this society, you pertain to this church, and that gives you a sense of who you are and what you're for. But certainly we've seen a lot of those institutions break down in the last, let's say 75 years. And I think it's left a lot of people feeling at odds ends, unable to express to themselves or to others their identity and their mission. So I just wanted to focus back on that relationship with the Lord, in which our identity and mission is revealed and mediated in the clearest of terms. Because, like what we hear said of our Lord, the natural Son of God, is said of us, the adopted sons and daughters of God, that we're beloved, and specifically that we have a place in his mystical body, that we have a role to play. It might not be grandiose by comparison to the people that we look up to, but it's precious. It's precious to the Lord, and we can have certainty and confidence that its goodness will be made available to us throughout the course of our life. And so the idea is that we show up in Eucharistic worship for the Lord because he's worthy. Again, we don't use him, we enjoy him, we show up for him. But what we come to discover is that Christ, in revealing the Father, also reveals man and woman to themselves. He reveals to us our identity and mission, and he gives us indication as to how our lives are meant to unfold within the setting of his body, for the praise of his glory, and for our salvation as well. So it's just to kind of displace that question, to make it less so a matter of the question that you pose to yourself about yourself, and make it more the question that you pose to God about God, which ends up clarifying yourself to yourself.
So in a word, if someone is like, Father Pine, don't know what I'm doing with my life, asking for a friend. But no, but because I have a lot of young folks who ask me this too, but what's your advice to them? What do you tell them? Like, hey, if I know God has a plan for my life, but how do I find it?
Yeah, I'd say maybe 3 things. Pray. And I'd say pray every day. Pray every morning. I think Christians pray in the morning. It's just, it's more difficult to put it off when you do it first.
True.
So pray, and then I would say commit. Not in the sense of like you have to get married yesterday, but in the sense that we come to our status, our full status as adopted sons and daughters of God, when we commit to these relationships with the Lord, with our family, with our society, with our church. Because if we're always just kind of flitting to and fro, looking for a better offer, trying to get a better invitation, then we'll end up losing a hold of who we are and what we're for. We'll lose a hold of ourselves. And then the third is trust. Namely, that God loves your destiny more than you do, that he has a plan that's better than you can imagine. It's bigger than the compass of your mind, but that he reveals it in time, and that by kind of suffering his timing or exhibiting a kind of patience, we can enter into the mystery of his passion, his death, and his resurrection, whereby we are transformed into his very likeness. So that's to say that like it's not all on you. God is working out your salvation. You are responsible for consenting to it, for cooperating with it in some measure, but your anxiety about your life, about your vocation, is probably the biggest obstacle to the living of your life and your vocation. If we can, in prayer, in commitment, breed something of that trust, it will empower us to live simply and well.
So in short, don't stress. God's got this, and he's a lot more active than you probably give him credit for.
Yes, yeah. in shorter, as Jesse McCartney once sang, don't stress, don't stress, don't stress. You deserve nothing but the best.
This is the word of the Lord. Oh, man. Well, Father Pine, thank you so much for joining us. I always learn new words. I learn new experiences, and I want to give a shout out to all the people who have hiked with you and offer a number they can call for support and counseling.
Their name is Legion.
Because actually every year you invite me to go hiking with you, and it has truly been the coincidence that I've not been able to go. Hearing this testimony today, I'm torn because statistically, what are the odds you're going to have another near-death experience?
Decent.
But also, that's the kind of material we want for this show. So I kind of want that for you.
Yeah. Next summer is John Muir Trail. The next summer is Switzerland.
Great. Okay, well, I look forward to that. Well, this has been an incredible journey, much safer than one taken with Father Pine. So, Father Pine, thank you so much for joining us, folks. Thank you for listening to Heaven Meets Earth. We'll see you next week.
Thank you to CBN for sponsoring this episode. Go to heavenmeetsearth.com to sign up for emails, learn more about the show, and support CBN. If you have any questions, comments, or miracle stories, follow us on social media at Heaven Earth Show and drop them in the comments there. You can also find your hosts on social media at Abigail CBN and The Bethea. See you next week.